that. I guess to start, what are some changes that people could see?
Well, it's a great question, and it will be much easier to answer in June. So there, let me start with Mayor Wheeler back in October. Asked for all bureaus except for public safety to submit 5 to 8% cut packages, and we got those from all the bureaus. In January, when the new council was seated, they thought that they should get proposals from public safety also. So we have proposals from public safety for the 5 to 8% cuts, both police and fire and emergency communications. We, the staff, in preparing this, looked at those cuts, and we thought that the council and the mayor probably wouldn't take those cuts, so we did not recommend them mostly. On the other hand, we know that this document is really supposed to be about a discussion with the public and with the council between now and end of April, so that it can inform the mayor's ultimately balanced budget. So all of those cuts that were proposed in response to the council's request are in the document, and they are available to be discussed. We just didn't recommend them because we're pretty sure that most people in Portland want to maintain public safety. Generally speaking, there are options there that I'm sure will get discussed. And to be fair, there's still a $57 million gap. And part of the way to fill that gap might be a discussion about public safety. And so that's really what this document is trying to frame for both the community and for the council, are a set of questions and options and very difficult choices. And there aren't really any good choices here, okay? It's about where will you find the money to balance the budget that must be balanced by the end of June. And so what we've tried to do is frame a number of questions and options for people to get feedback. And we will be out in community, in districts, talking with community about these options during March and April. We've got a number of work sessions with the full council also to get their feedback and thoughts. And, oh, by the way, I'll mention one other thing. The possible options for filling these gaps are not necessarily all in this document. There may be ideas that people come up with that we didn't consider. And so we're open to new ideas too about how to figure out how to balance this budget.
And those listening sessions, like you said, they start in March.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Right.
I'll let Cody do facilitating.
I understand there's a possibility proposal to dissolve vibrant communities to balance the budget. What can you tell me about that? I know it's not included in here specifically.
Right. There are, excuse me, we're at a moment in time for the city where we're going through a transition in government. We took a large framework plan to the city council back in November of 23 that they adopted. It included the 6 service areas that we currently have, one of them being vibrant communities. I think we always knew that as we continued to think about this new organizational structure, that there would be more changes and more thoughts about how to organize the city and how to think about the way we deliver service in different ways. It just so happens that we are looking at those things in the context of a pretty significant budget shortfall. And so while at a different time in the city's history, we might be looking at reorganizing certain things without the necessity to find savings, but now we do. And so one of the discussions on the table is, should we have 6 service areas? And so that is a discussion that's ongoing right now. Also within the organizational structure of the city, we have a fairly significant number of what I would call internal services, right? And they include things like communications, engagement, equity, HR, IT, procurement, and budget and finance. We are in the process of looking at the way all of those services are delivered, mostly to bureaus. Those are services to individual bureaus. In the old world, under the old form of government, if we were looking for savings from those service delivery processes, we would likely say, give us 5% savings. And what we would do, generally speaking, is we would water down the service delivery that was being delivered. We'd just do less service. Because we're restructuring the city, because there's an opportunity here in the transition to look at things differently, I'm asking folks who are within those service delivery business processes to actually think about restructuring the business process. And I'll give you an example. All of those processes were developed over several decades with a bureau-centric view of the world. So bureau by bureau by bureau, these services have evolved over time. And I'm asking people to take a look at those services from an enterprise perspective rather than a bureau by bureau perspective. And so I'm not asking people to water them down. I'm asking them to be re-engineered, restructured from an enterprise perspective. And it is likely that I will be giving them targets for reduction, whether that's staff or it's contracts or whatever it is. We have to figure out a way to reduce the footprint because of what you've just heard about our budget. And so we will be doing that over probably the next year and a half. We will get to incorporate some of those savings in this budget, but implementation of all those changes won't be able to all be done by July 1st. And so we will have to be looking at how can we implement over the course of the next fiscal year, and how much of those savings could we experience if, let's say, we were able to implement a change in a service delivery system by December 31st. So in that case, at least kind of hypothetically, we would experience half the savings next year of the restructuring. Now the year after, we should experience all the savings for a full fiscal year. So I've just given you a lot of stuff there, and I apologize for that. But it is a process that is ongoing. And it is really the intersection of a really challenging budget and the fact that we're restructuring the organization of the city. And so look for that to be a continuing process over the next year and a half-ish. Sophie?
Is any of that potential restructuring incorporated into this?
You'll see some narrative about it in one of, and I can't remember exactly where it is, Ruth can tell you exactly, but the numbers are the TBD numbers.
Okay.
That's part of those.
Okay.
Yep.
Is there any ballpark figure you can get? Like, I think I'm struggling to understand if this is going to be like a $1 million
Is it
thing, or
bigger than a bread
$20
box and smaller than a garage? Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, exactly.
Got it. I think it's somewhere in between. I think, well, I'm not going to give you a number, okay? I think there are significant savings that can be found in the entire organization over all the business processes I just mentioned. I can't tell you if that's $5 million or it's $10 million or it's $25 million. I just can't tell you that right now because we really do have to look at the business process and examine where's our human resource today, what do they do today, can they be realigned, are there redundancies between bureaus, do we have external contracts by multiple bureaus that could be consolidated and be smaller? I think yes, but I don't know. So that's what we're doing over literally the next year and a half. We'll be doing it.
Thanks.
Yep.
Go ahead, Jane. So, in reference to this
Yeah.
chart here, if we're looking at the general fund gap and then beyond general fund gap, taken collectively, we're looking at over $150 million in sort of a shortfall, more 157 more or less. And what year? I just want to be clear so we know I'm understanding the numbers correctly. What the recommendations here addresses about $34 million of that 157.
Well, I'll let Ruth take a shot at this.
So a couple of things that, granted, are a little bit confusing, but that are not apples to apples about this. So the general fund gap is the 93 million. That's analogous to the 100 million we talked about before. In beyond the general fund, those are actual reductions that are expected to take place, which is not the gap. And so those aren't, you can't, they're different things. These are the actual reductions. So there's 16.7 million of ongoing reductions in general fund bureaus, and there's 65 million of reductions in non-general fund bureaus. Also, there's a little bit of double counting there because Parks has general fund and non-general fund, and Transportation has some general fund as well. So you can't really add them together. Is that?
Evan, we'll go with you.
Understanding the 57 million in the remaining gap here, kind of go with your first and second questions. You mentioned the public safety, the 38 million is not recommended right now, but on those line items for options for closing that gap, that is kind of the largest number there. Maybe to the second part, getting to the TBD, if that is not something that is adopted, as you said, we don't anticipate that being the desire here, what would then be kind of the largest chunk you would point to, or an option that would be able to get out of that 57 million?
Therein lies the rub. That's why we're presenting all of these challenges, let's put it that way. If you look at the general fund, there are really three big issues that we're looking at. One is public safety, no question. I can't remember the exact number, but there's about $25 or $30 million of general fund money that was injected into police and fire in the current budget to help them bridge the overtime challenges that they've got, right? So those challenges continue to exist. So public safety is a big issue in the general fund. And, oh, by the way, it's what, 70%-ish of the whole general fund. The other big issue is what we call the fiscal cliff. We have built a system to deal with livability and houselessness issues in the last 5 years at the city that was predominantly built on one-time funding. Whether that was federal money or it was one-time general fund money, a lot of it was built with one-time money. We have come pretty much to the end of that one-time money. And now that presents a real challenge for the general fund to be able to, how do you keep this system going in the future? So that's the second one. And then the third one is the Parks Bureau and the issue about the levy and the costs of their services and how are we going to manage that, not just in the coming year, but beyond that. And so trying to think about what would that next 5-year levy look like to be able to maintain services really 6 years into the future. And when you look at, I don't know that I want to go down this rabbit hole, but when you look at the property tax system in the state, and you look at the way levies take compression first, the parks levy has to account for that compression over a long period of time, and they have to think about the increased cost of service over that longer period of time in trying to size that levy. And so that's the kind of third really big challenging question that sits within the general fund right now.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, aside from expiring federal funding, I'm curious, I didn't see any jump out in the documents, but is there any potential threats to federal funding that has already been promised from the federal government with all of these kind of changes in funding at the White House right now?
Short answer is I don't know. I think we articulate in the document that it is a risk, but how much of a risk? Almost everything going on with the federal government right now is on an hour-to-hour basis, so I really can't predict. I also know that, and we have all seen, that many of the moves that the administration is attempting to make is challenged in court. And trying to predict how those things will go is just a fool's errand, I think. However, we do recognize, given the atmospherics at the federal level, is we run some risks there. And so we're certainly considering that.
Right. On that $92.8 million figure, we talked about the county's funding if they don't get that. What level of confidence do you have in that figure today that it could go up, could go down, and if it were to change, when do you foresee that happening?
Well, I'm pretty confident that it won't go up significantly. We are in discussions with the county every day about the intergovernmental agreement that we have regarding our current sheltering obligations, I'll say. Obviously, we already talked a little bit about that the county and the city may have different opinions about what that IGA says. So I don't expect 92 to go up significantly. And I'm hopeful the mayor is in conversations daily with the governor and the legislature and with Metro and Multnomah County about how we assumed the $28 million that he believes is necessary to expand shelter to night sheltering. We believe that he will get some of that money. Will he get it all? I don't know. So I think the 92 could go down. I'm pretty sure it won't go up significantly.
On the timeline, any idea?
Well, that's a challenge, and it's good. It's a good question. When you're trying to get funding from a state legislature that's in session, often you don't know the exact answer to that till the end of the session, and end of session will be somewhere around the end of June, and we have to have a balanced budget adopted before that. Now, we can come back after July 1st if we find that we've got, an extra X millions of dollars from the state. We can come back in July and amend the budget, incorporate the money into the budget. So it's not the end of the world that we don't know. However, we do have to balance the budget. And so we will have to look hard at whether we can accomplish what the mayor wants, whether we can continue the level of service and current sheltering, whether we can backfill as much overtime as we did in the past with public safety, whether parks will have to actually take all those cuts or not. Those are questions that we're going to have to answer, probably before we know about some of these outside funding questions.
Do one more question, so I'm gonna go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, going back to that public safety piece.
Sure.
This document suggests a cap of overtime hours to the tune of roughly 15,000 hours for police. But it also suggests to keep police staffing relatively the same when police and current counselors tell us that the current staffing levels is why we ended up with more than $21 million paid out in overtime this last year. Is it reasonable to assume that this cap would not lead to the same outcome if staffing levels are going to be the same?
Wow, we could be here a few more hours to talk about that question. It is a bit of a conundrum for public safety, 24/7 operations, no matter where you look. The balance between the full-time staffing and the amount of overtime that's used by these agencies is always a challenge. It's always a dilemma. I think we have a model to follow to get ourselves out of this, but I will tell you, on the short term, it's an expensive shift. And the issue there is usually you have to overhire to be able to manage the overtime, and the particular characteristic of public safety agencies is how long it takes to get a new hire to be a full-time employee that can add to your capacity. And for police, it takes about 18 months. And so getting that pipeline of hiring filled so that it can actually get to a point where it can reduce overtime is usually a multi-year effort. And in the years you're trying to make up the difference, you end up paying for both. And so it's a pretty expensive challenge. Not that we shouldn't do it, not that we don't want to try to get there. If you ask Chief Day, he'll tell you, we need more full-time officers. I agree with him. How we can manage that transition is just the challenge we have right now.
Can I ask one
Can I ask
question
a
the public
general
might have?
Well,
One last question.
Okay.
We're really close to time.
Okay,
Mine's really
so
too.
taxes are going up and up and up for the taxpayer. Yet now it sounds like services are gonna go down and down and down. Can you help them understand how that's possible?
Well, I can try. The tax structure in the metropolitan area is a complex and overlapped thing. The city does not control all the taxes that are levied on individuals in Multnomah County and in the city of Portland, right? Metro has a tax, Multnomah County has a tax. We have property taxes and we have a business license tax. Those are our general pieces of revenue. I don't disagree that taxes are going up for people, but so are costs. And as I've said before, at least I'll just speak for the city of Portland, can't speak for everybody else. We're spending, somewhere between $40 and $60 million a year on a suite of services that didn't exist 5 years ago. All the shelters, the incident reduction program, the street services coordinating group, the PMO group that's a problem-solving group around livability issues. None of that existed 5 years ago. So there are new services in that suite that we're asking citizens to pay for. If you ask me, I think one of the big challenges for the taxpayer, I don't think is the amount of taxes. I think it's, can we deliver on what their expectation is when they pay that tax bill?
So
And
has
that's
the
where
city
we're trying to get.
So has the city been delivering for the taxpayers?
Well, I think we're certainly trying, that's for sure. I think Mayor Wilson has some new ideas about homelessness and livability, which is the top priority in any poll you look at for folks in the city. And I think we're gonna try very hard to put a budget together that can deliver on his new ideas and maintain services that we already have. As you can see from the numbers, it's gonna be a trick this year.
All right, we have to pause here. I've got to get Mike to his next meeting, but Carrie Belding, she is the lead for budget, and so if we have any follow-up questions, Carrie can help.
I also was able to talk Ruth into another half an hour max for some background questions.
I want,
now.
before I leave, I would like to say one thing. This is a very different approach to doing the budget than we have ever done before. In the past, I've been here 10 years, and I can just tell you for the last 10 years, some folks been here longer can tell you, when we had gone to the public with the budget in the past, it was cooked. It was already balanced, it was all done, and we would go out and ask, what do you think? We've decided this year, and we're gonna do this from now on, it's not just because we're having a rough year. We're gonna do this from now on as a process, as a way of doing business, that we're gonna go to the public with the kind of tipping point questions that we would really like their feedback on. What's most important to you? If we have to cut a budget, which one would you cut? Where would you tolerate a reduced service if you could, if you had to? So the next 6 weeks or so, 7 weeks, are really gonna be about getting input from folks, both the public and the council. We've got a new council, they feel very strongly 12 ways, and we're gonna try and figure out what do they want in this budget also, so that when the mayor proposes a balanced budget before May the 5th, it will have taken in as much public input and as much council input as we can to try and accommodate what people really want out of this budget for the next fiscal year.
Do you have anything to say to the public after releasing this today? Because it's going to be a lot of information for them to digest and probably kind of difficult too.
Please, there'll be a website to give thoughts for. There will be meetings in districts. Please come to them. Please give us your input. And if you can't make it to a meeting, call your city councilor. You now have 3 counselors that work for you, no matter where you live in this city. You've got 3 counselors that work for you. Please exercise that access to those. They want to hear from you. And we want to hear from you. So please take the opportunity. I know everybody's busy. Everybody's got a real life. I realize this can be really Wonkavision sometimes, and I get it. But it's really important that we hear from people. So, thanks,
All right,
everybody.
we gotta get Mike out, but Carrie, do you wanna help facilitate with Ruth?
Sure.
First, other follow-up questions?
This is optional. If you guys wanna ask Ruth some more technical questions, so complex.
Yes. Okay, this is a super dense question, and I feel a little dumb asking it, but the 32 million in general fund reductions that are represented here, these preliminary recommended cuts, where's the bulk of it come, like, can you just give me a quick, like, here are the 5 and 6 buckets where it's
Sure,
coming from?
sure, yeah, not a dumb question. One correction though, it's split between reductions and additions. So I think in the infographic you can see it, but the 18.7 is the transfer from the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and the 16.7 is the reduction in the general fund bureaus. So there's about 5.6 million of that is Parks General Fund.
Okay.
And so that is part of their overall sort of list of reductions, which are quite extensive, and you can see it on the 2-pager there about vibrant communities. You know, that those are some significant reductions that will be felt in the community. After that, I don't have like a great breakdown for you off the top of my head right now. I'm happy to get it for you in email. But they're all across the organization, right? They're, you know, in our central services organizations, they're in housing in Prosper Portland, so all of the sort of general fund functions have some, you know, roughly 5 to 8% cut. They're not all exactly the number that was asked for, because there were decisions and refining, right, of the proposals that were put on the table.
So Parks is sort of the biggest bulk of that, even though it's only 5.6 million of the 32.
Yeah.
And then the rest is just like 300K, 1.1 million.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think when you look at the pie chart there of what's in the general fund, it just sort of follows that pie chart, right? So police, fire, and 911 are excluded from those reductions. There's other parts of public safety that were also elected officials were excluded from the reductions, and there's some legal obligations that were excluded, and then, you know, and then Mike didn't recommend for the cuts to Portland Solutions or Portland Street Response. So it kind of follows the pie chart after that, right? So the reason Parks is the biggest is because it's the biggest chunk of that pie.
Okay, thanks.
Ruth, I guess this is a quick question. Was the 32.5, is that a typo? Was the reduction actually 35.4, right? With the revenues from clean energy and the 16.7 million? The 35.4?
I'll double check and get back to you. Yeah, we'll update it if that's wrong.
Can you explain a little bit of you said not recommending cuts to Portland Street Response. I'm seeing like a $500,000 cut in there. Can you explain that? There was like an additional 1.7 million or something that you recommended, but it looks like
There's no cut to Portland Street Response.
There's not.
Yeah.
Can you line item that outside of the 28 million for the mirror shelters, there's the Portland Street Response for that 40 million new city?
Yeah. So there's the 28 million that's in the one-time column. The about 21 million is backfilling public safety. So all of the expiring one-time, most of the expiring one-time funding in police, fire, Portland Street Response, ceasefire, and Office of Violence Prevention. That's the next biggest chunk of that 40 million. After that, there's sorry, I'm trying to remember. There's the ad for city council and mayor office staffing, and then there's things kind of get smaller after that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much.
Ruth, going back to kind of the 32.5 million, those initial recommended solutions, I guess, I know this was kind of talked about throughout, but I guess maybe kind of explain just the process a little well, why did they recommend only,
Yeah.
this amount and leave the rest up?
Yeah, sure.
Interpretation?
And Mike talked a bit about this. This is a starting point. These are intentionally not balanced recommendations. That's the job of the mayor to do that first, right? The things that were not recommended for are things that we know the mayor and city council think of as top priorities. And it will be their job to kind of listen to the input of Portlanders in the next couple of months and figure out how they want to balance that. Additionally, we know that there's kind of the external revenue question floating out there that we will hopefully know more about by May, but we, as Mike said, we don't know when we will know more about that. And so it kind of doesn't make sense to make all of the other decisions when you have all these variables that are still in play that you can't put a figure on yet, because you don't know yet what the choices are that you're going to have to make around things like public safety and Portland Solutions that were not recommended to move forward. So it's it's kind of putting things, we're trying to be transparent and put things on the table for discussion while we don't have complete information.
Would you characterize the level of uncertainty? Is this like a once-in-your-career thing? Is this common in what you do?
The level of uncertainty?
With the budget, it seems like there's just so much that's still in flux, and I'm curious if that's normal.
That is normal. But I would say that I think at this point in the process, there's always questions, and if I could tell you where we were going to land in May, then we could all go home. But I don't know where we're going to land in May now. The balance here is how do you share information with the public and have a meaningful discussion about real options with the fact that we don't know answers to all of the questions right now. So that is always true. I think the part that's hopefully once in a career, or at least once in a decade, is the size of the problem.
I'm curious about the PSEF interest potentially being transferred over to the general fund. Is there concern about the precedent of moving money around that's like voter enacted that's already earmarked for specific projects? And I know it's kind of a one-time thing, but what happens
Yeah.
next year?
I can speak to at least the technical part of that question, or the factual pieces. So last year, a similar action happened, and it was one time. The proposal is to do it again this year. The PSEF committee has been briefed, and they're looking at, I think we talked about it in the document, looking at there has to be a change to the code in order to allow it. So that would come to city council separately as a decision. And it is one time in nature because it is interest that has already accrued to the fund. So it's not a number that ties out to some ongoing amount, right? It only is the one-time amount based on the interest in the audited financial report.
If I'm not mistaken, you can help me clarify. That's kind of part of the point, right? Is that there's ongoing interest that then still goes to this project? As part of that piece of package. That's like what keeps it stable into the future.
So the use of the transfer of the interest would not impact any PSEF projects or allocations
Now.
or in the future. Their plan for spending the fund, essentially, this is sort of on top of that. Does that help?
Clarification question from me. We talked about the table, the potential staffing impacts table, or we went over that. That is incorporated in the decision packages. Those kind of reductions of positions, seats, whatever it is part of what's already been contributed for. So then when there's the options for closing, because this remaining gap that mentions personnel reductions, TBD, that would be on top of what comes in that table later. That'd be additional,
That's right.
correct?
Yep, that's right.
You've talked a lot about numbers here. I'm not convinced the public really is in tune or cares much about numbers. When they call 911, they want the police to be there. when they drive down the street, they don't like seeing the garbage, and when they walk through the streets, if you're downtown, there's all these tents still here, after all the money that's been spent. Is this problem that Portland has, after all this money that's gonna be spent, is it ever going to end?
That's a good question for Mike.
Yeah. I'm the numbers person, so I like numbers.
Also, I mean, I guess kind of picking off of that, I guess the temporary solutions to like sending the one-time money into temporary solutions. I just kind of want to confirm that that's what Mike Jordan was saying. It has caused the issue around a lot of homeless and stuff. Is that it's not invested in longer term things, but it's just money that's kind of running out as and things have to
So,
then go away, right?
to clarify that, the one-time funding hasn't caused the problems. It was a, in the case of the American Rescue Plan funding, that was one time, $200 million that the city received, all cities, we're not alone in this at all. It received during the pandemic, and so at the time, in 2021, the city council was allocating that to emergency things. I mean, it paid for things like vaccine clinics, so it's not, it was emergency money, and it was used for that purpose. I think in the one-time funding, the other thing is there's a table on page, I don't know, in the document about the fiscal cliff and kind of explaining that. And again, we're not alone in this. The fiscal cliff kind of peaked, I guess, in fiscal year 22-23, and we've kind of been coming down the other side. We've been trying to do that in a way that bridges the gap, right? If we had just said in 23-24, oh well, I guess we'll end all of these services that we've now stood up, that would have had a pretty big impact for Portlanders. And so we've been trying to be creative and do what we could with the resources that were available. And, that's again, we're not alone. There's always some amount of one-time funding in the budget. And so I think we are coming down the other side. Each year that cliff gets smaller, and it just this year coincides with the sort of revenues that have been coming in lower than expected as well.
Hi, go ahead. Just a super specific question. You talked about closing a community center. Do you know what community center that would be?
No.
It's all that you don't have any specifics on, like the summer programs, day camps, the sports facilities?
There are more specifics online. So on the website I showed at the beginning, there are decision package, actual narrative for each package in each respective service area. And so you can read through all of that and see that will be the most specific detail on any of those packages. So you can read through the Vibrant Communities decision package report and see what the narrative says for the specific cuts that you're interested in.
Okay.
We'll circulate that link.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned levies, like the parks, when voters agreed. How was it, $30 million? What was the number?
I think you're thinking about the Clean Energy Fund, which
Well,
is
there's
not
that
a
too.
levy. The levy doesn't,
Didn't you mention a levy for parks earlier?
yeah, the parks levy is a
Okay.
dedicated property tax levy of 80 cents per thousand.
Okay, so when that money comes into the city, was that added on top of the already budget, what the city had budgeted for parks? Or, so that the parks have more and more money?
So this is.
I mean, how does that work when the citizens want better parks, so they all agree, we're gonna tax ourselves to have better parks? And
Yeah.
money's given to the city.
Yeah.
What does the city do with that money?
So
The question is, do they reduce what they were already planning to spend in parks?
No. So there's there's specific legal requirements that the parks levy cannot supplant other funds. It's new. It's in addition. You can see the parks levy reports on their website. We can probably circulate that link, and it explains how they spend all of that levy resource. And they just had an audit of that levy and was clean. So yes, it's all in addition.
Thanks.
All right.